look at the Department of Energy perspective on the revised consent order. We have the EM manager for DOE here, Mr. Doug Hintze. So he'll take the floor. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Members, thank you very much for letting me be here to present this afternoon. And just like we talked about earlier, this here is just the start. We're just introducing this topic of the revised consent order, and there's going to be many more meetings for us as we go forward on this. Also like to thank Secretary Flynn, Katie, and Jeff for being here. And we heard a lot of good feedback, input from them. And we'd like to thank them for being willing partners with us as we go forward to tackle this tough problem. It's always good when you have all the input and you can go out there and do what is the right thing, the right way to take care of an issue. Also like to thank the members of the general public who are here for taking the time out of their day to be here. I won't include those of you who work for me who were forced to be here, so anyway. Let me just start from the very basic that I see that where we stand that a lot of folks don't have, and that is we have stuff in the ground that we all agree should not be there, and we have waste that we need to get rid of. So if we all agree to that, and I've never had anybody say that's not the answer, then it's easy. The easy part is we agree that we need to do something about it. The only question is, what do we do, and in what time, in order to get rid of it? So that's why we're all here, is to get that input to make sure everyone knows, everyone agrees that we're going to take it out of the ground. I've talked in several meetings. There's 3 different priorities that I have here. First one is safety. And how many of you folks have ever been to Disneyland or Disney World? A lot of you, right? When you walk into those, do you ever worry about safety? Do you ever worry that you're going to go on a ride and not come back to the start point of that ride? And the answer is no. But you know what the number one priority of Disney is? Safety. Not, making you have a good time or make money. It's safety. So safety is built into their operations, and safety should be built into our operations here such that it's never questioned. And that's one of the things that the event down there at WIP, we're still trying to get our hands around that part of the priority. But safety should be a given. So that's the first thing. Second thing is transparency. What we do here when we talk about cleanup of soil and water and disposition of waste, it's not classified from a national security perspective. So there is no reason why the things that we do, the issues we have to address, the problems we have to resolve are not done with all of us together. That's us who are responsible for cleaning it up. That's for the regulators who are responsible for making sure it gets done. And that's for you, the general public, and all the interested parties to make sure that we're doing it the right way. So transparency, and this here is just the first step in that transparency on this issue for the consent order. And then the third thing is the efficiency. We've talked a little bit or a lot today about funding. And so we never, and when I say never, I'm not aware that I've always ever had all the money that I want. And I don't think anybody in this room has, and that goes for us as an agency as well. And Ryan, Secretary Flynn mentioned about, he'd like to see $255 million for the cleanup. Well, whatever amount of money we get, whether it's the 189 that's been referred, 200, 250, whatever it is, we need to be good stewards of the taxpayers and use that money wisely and efficiently. And that's the third priority. So it's safety, transparency, and then efficiency. So that's how we're going to address this here. And the consent order is one of those tools that's going to allow us to go forward to accomplish our mission. But before I go into the subject of the day, talking about the consent order and how we're going to attempt to proceed, I do have to take that one step back and talk about the baselines. I won't comment on the $1.2 billion figure that Secretary Flynn announced. All I will tell you is that there is a revised baseline that is up at headquarters for review and approval, and as soon as that passes through that process, I am committed to come here and to discuss that baseline in as much depth as you want. I, in my entire military and federal career, have been a planner. Strategic planning, operational planning, tactical planning, so we can discuss plans until you're probably sick of me. So the only issue right now is, when is that baseline going to be available for us to discuss? And I agree with Secretary Flynn 100%, and just like my grandma used to tell me, a poor plan is better than no plan at all. You got to have something to start with to figure out where you're going. So we will take care of that as soon as we get that through the review process at headquarters. Okay? So let me then go back into what's the perspective that we, Department of Energy, have for the as we go forward on the consent order. Okay? The first thing that we have is that we have to actually achieve work and get to the end state. We can, and I'll tell you here on this, when I talk about accomplishments, we can give the regulators hundreds of documents. We can go back and forth, but that doesn't get the work done. Our whole purpose, your whole concern, their whole concern, is that we actually come to a final end state that we all agree on. And so it's more than just meeting commitments or deliverables, because we can do a lot of that and never get to what we really are trying to accomplish. Okay? So the DOE perspective is, this consent order, we need to make sure that we have tangible results that we can all achieve. The second thing is, as we go forward, and this is just like plans as well, we have to have realistic expectations and assumptions going into that consent order. And this is why it's important when we're talking about, and Secretary Flynn talked about, the campaigns and setting the milestones and commitments on a rolling type basis. He told us he would like to see $250 million. I'd like to see $300 or $400 million. But you know what? The funding is not determined by us. It's determined by the U.S. Congress. And the whole purpose of plans and so forth are to make sure that they understand what we're trying to accomplish, and that helps them determine what funding comes to us. It also helps our delegation, it helps you, the general public, it helps economic development groups understand that we're all giving the same message back to Congress when it comes to funding here. But you got to have realistic assumptions and expectations. We just talked about that the President's budget request in 16 for Los Alamos, or the Environmental Management Program, is $189 million. It does us no good to develop a consent order with commitments that are at $300 million a year if we're only getting $189 million a year. And the comment was made, and I don't know how to say this, but when the comment was made, do you think that they would have made commitments to drive the budget that would not be realistic? Actually, that's what happened. The Department of Energy, or the Environmental Management Program, has roughly $7.5 billion, $8 billion a year in commitments, and we get funding to $6 billion, around there. Mark Whitney, our EM2, acting EM1, has said that out in many public meetings, which means that, our belief, our expectations, our assumptions was funding was going to continue to grow, and that's why we would make those commitments, and then the funding would match. Well, I think all of us have seen over the last several years that's not the case. So, as we go through this consent order, we're going to make sure that the expectations, the assumptions that we have as far as funding, and other things such as technology, you can't assume that you're going to wave your magic wand and these things are going to be fixed. Okay? So it's realistic expectations and assumptions. And the third thing, very important, that Secretary Flynn, pointed out to all of us, was the flexibility. We need to have the flexibility to change those deliverables as we go forward as our priorities change. And a great example is the chromium. That wasn't identified at that time, and now it's one of the greatest priorities. This tool that we have, the consent order, should be a tool that we can then change the priorities as we go along, as necessary. So those are the perspectives from the Department of Energy that we have. 3 things there. It's got to be, we got to have tangible results, realistic expectations and assumptions, and then we have to have flexibility. Okay, so that's what we're going through for this process. So I'm going to go through here. So the best thing you're going to hear from me today is that I'm not going to take 2 hours to go through this. I got about 30 minutes to do this. And again, because this is the first presentation we have, I'm not going to bore you to tears. Or I might bore you to tears, but I won't bore you to death, is what it comes down to. So the first thing I'm going to talk about here is accomplishments. So who's flicking? Oh, am I flicking this? Okay. Where am I supposed to point? Doesn't matter. Okay. So I'm just going to go over this real quick because here's my view is we've done a lot of things. We've done a lot of good things. We've cleaned up a lot of things. But the time that we celebrate is when we transfer that last waste off-site or we clean up that last groundwater contamination. That's when we can all go to the bar and have a drink. So we're trying to get there, and a lot of things have been done. So let me go through real quick. I got a lot of numbers on my piece of paper here, but it doesn't do us any good to pat ourselves on the back at this time here. This here just showing some of the soil and groundwater work we've done. We have roughly 2,100 solid waste management units, and we've cleaned up roughly 60% of that. We're down to 800 out of those 2,100s. And what we're talking about, the campaigns, when we talk about here as we go forward on my second presentation, will address the remaining 800 solid waste management units that we have out there. Okay? Other things that we have here. We put in groundwater monitoring wells, 139 of those over the last decade or whatever like that. One of the things, I come from the Savannah River site down in South Carolina. Our groundwater was actually above some of our tanks that were in the ground. So if we needed to do a monitoring well, we could stab our foot in the ground and the well would be dug. We had 2,500 wells down there. Here, it takes roughly $3.5 million to drill a well with the groundwater down at 1,000 feet. So it is a significant effort when we're talking about the monitoring capability that we have. And that's, 139 of those wells, that's a significant chunk of change to do that. And it's necessary. And we'll be putting more wells in as we go ahead because it's going to be necessary in order for us to complete this work. Regulatory deliverables, I got on the sheet here, 1,001. 1,001 deliverables, Well, that's not the end result. It's great to give in there, but that just means we delivered pieces of paper and they gave us comments and so forth. We need to get to the point where we're cleaning the stuff up to the end state. And that's what I'll keep telling you. The whole campaign purpose is so that you keep the end in mind and then you can get there by whatever activities that are all agreed upon by the public, by the technical folks, by the regulators. Part of the transparency that we talked about, we have created a database that contains the sampling, monitoring data in there that's open to the general public so that you can see it. And then also we have an early warning type of system that we put in as far as the groundwater and the way that it flows into affecting the water supply at the Buckman Direct Diversion project. So those are some of the things that we've done from that soil and groundwater monitoring. And this here is just a couple pictures that we were down there. If you're up in Los Alamos, know where the Smith Marketplace is. These are some of the ways that we have to take care of that remediation. And one of the things is if you live on and again, this goes back to me. I've lived in a place where it's mainly flat, and so when you're trying to do remediations, it's a lot easier when things are flat. This here, a great example of the effort that we had to go to in order to do that remediation for the terrain where the contamination was. And again, as I go forward with the campaigns, even though there may be approaches that are presented, the whole input that is being asked for is to make sure that we're doing it the right way. And so the first thing is, don't look at the things that we have here as this is the way it's going to be done. These are just planning type assumptions, and the input is what's going to be coming from you folks to actually determine how we do it. Okay? This here is just some more of the excavation, and this goes back to, if you look on the left side there, that's excavation. If you look up in the very top hand of the first left picture, what you see there is the town is right next to where we're doing that cleanup. And so we made those excavation, or those domes there, and that lower left-hand one you see is inside those huts to make sure that any release, any exposure to the public is limited. On the right-hand side, what you're seeing is, those are a couple slides talking about the chromium project. Lower right is talking about the chromium extraction well, which we're actually pumping out of that, 80 gallons a minute, to extract the liquids, and then we're treating it, the water, and then we're land applying it. And somebody mentioned here you had the question for the environmental department a little bit earlier about land application. And then up in the tanks, up in the right, is just talking about some of those storage tanks for the water that's coming out of that. Waste disposition. I'm not going to go into a lot on the waste disposition. We've heard a lot about the waste disposition over the last year, what happened at WIP. You've heard about the nitrate salts and so forth. This here is just showing the scale of that waste disposition. We have disposed of roughly 36,000 55-gallon drums. That comes out to probably about 7,000 cubic meters. Each drum is about 0.2 cubic meter. We've also, as we go through, because one of the things that most people fail to remember, the standards at the time were not the same as the standards that you had now. So there, back in the 60s, before the 70s or whatever, there was no true definition of what transuranic waste was. And so we buried a lot of this waste here, and now as you come to the standards, you have to then treat it based on the standards of today. So when I talk about us dispositioning the 35,000 cans, part of the waste that we dug up and we've dispositioned ended up not being transuranic waste. So somewhere around 1,300 cubic meters was low-level waste that got dispositioned in a different manner. And then we've also gone out there and like I said, if we buried it, you just don't leave it there. So we've dug up 16,000 drums equivalents of material that was buried underground. And so all that's tied in with our waste disposition program. And again, we got to make sure that we do it safely and regain the confidence, because we caused that incident at WIP. We had to prove that we can do this in a safe manner, and then of course we're talking about that transparent and efficient manner. So that's the waste. This here is just a picture of special transuranic waste. This is remote handled. We dispositioned 16 remote handled canisters, and you can see the special transportation canister up on the truck up on the top. And of course, as you can imagine, remote handled, because it's more dangerous from an exposure perspective. So it has to be, the processes and procedures are much more intensive. And then, of course, the third leg of this, after we do the cleanups, is there's the demolition and decommissioning. The facilities that are there need to go away. And again, it all depends on what the end state is, whether the land may be transferred to the county or to whomever, to a pueblo or whatever. and/or if there's future use involved with it. One of the things that we're doing for DOE from an efficiency perspective is the way our funding comes from Congress comes in buckets. And you can only spend that money on what is specifically defined for where that bucket is. We've had our D&D, our demolition decommissioning funds, separate from our soil and groundwater funds. So that meant if you didn't get enough money in the D&D account to tear down the building at first, even if you had money in the soil and groundwater cleanup, you couldn't clean up the land below it. So we're going back, changing the way that we're going to Congress for the money, so it's all going to be in the same bucket. That way you can do both of those, the D&D and the environmental, the soil and water cleanup, out of the same funding. That's common sense to do something like that, okay?